Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Talent Talks podcast. This is season 2, episode 5, where we will be talking about educating and learning about Native American culture in celebration of November as Native American Heritage Month. Tonight with us, we have Dr. Michele Weber and Professor John Torres. Professor Torres, thank you so much for joining us. Would you care to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Sure. I'm Navajo from Four Corners, so I'll quickly introduce myself. Yat e shiko denishindene, shne John Torres unishe, toathlini nesli, nakai dene bashischin, no da dene deshinali, aro nakai dene deshinali. Sorry that was long. It's just the way we introduce ourselves with all our clans. But yeah, my name's John Torres. I'm Navajo. I'm from Four Corners. I'm Professor of Anthropology and Archaeology here at Mount San Jacinto College.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Four Corners, is that New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona?
One left.
Utah.
Utah, okay.
Utah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado.
Oh, fantastic. I grew up in Albuquerque, so.
Oh, all right.
I know New
Yeah, I
Mexico.
grew up in Farmington, so you probably know where Farmington is.
I do. I know Farmington. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Actually, technically, I grew up in Naizi, but nobody knows where that is. So.
No.
Although you might.
No, I don't.
No. Oh, and I grew up in Southern California, so I'm over here like I got no clue. But that's okay. We're here to learn. So first question for you is why is it important to represent diverse and contemporary Native American voices, experiences, and perspectives?
Well, I think the big part of it is that there's just this idea that Native people are sort of a monolith. I mean, we're always portrayed as the Plains Indian stereotype with the war bonnet and the buckskins and the beaded moccasins. And the result, the reality is that, yeah, the Plains people have their own thing, but Northern Plains is still different from Southern Plains, which is different from Middle Plains. Yet we're all kind of thought of as that way. But, even within where our college is, there's 4 tribes just within around San Jacinto. Navajo Nation, we're the biggest. We have 17 million acres and 350,000 of us, which is why Navajos are everywhere. But I am as different as the Apaches are different, as the Utes and the Comanches, and that you can go on 500 or so nations. And we're all different languages, different cultures, different customs. Yeah, we're related for sure. I mean, Navajo and Apache are related to each other. Comanches and Utes are related to each other. The Kuya and Luiseno are related to each other. Yeah, we're just very different, and we don't all run around with war bonnets, and that's okay. That's the Plains do their thing, and we do our own. So it's important to realize that we're okay with that stereotype if that's what you want to use at Plains people. But the reality is that we're, ask. We'll definitely tell you how different we are.
All right. Yeah, it's important not to just rely on stereotypes. I think it's part of why we're talking about this is to improve people's knowledge and differentiate between the different nations, because you all have a beautiful and rich heritage that should be celebrated.
Thank you.
You're welcome. In your words, what is unique about Native American culture?
Well, I guess, it's, again, there's 500 nations, there's 500 different viewpoints, but sort of one sort of pan cosmology that seems to permeate with all the people of the entire Western Hemisphere, North and South America, is this idea of a balance between what human beings can do and what nature can provide. And that there was this idea that you can never exceed that carrying capacity. There were 120 million people living in the hemisphere before European contact. And they managed everything from giant game preserves like the plains to agricultural fields like the Southwest and the woodlands and the giant city states like in Mesoamerica. But there was always this idea that, the earth, the mother's only going to provide so much, and you can't get too big or in order to do that. There was this more of an idea that, even laborers, even the sort of the lower levels of within societies still need to have a roof and food over their head, and that there was this larger sense of community. which is, what the Spanish were able to take advantage of when they arrived. It's like, well, look at all the food they have. It's like, well, yeah, because they're making sure everybody eats. You look at all the textiles they have. Well, yeah, it's because we're making sure everyone has enough clothing and bedding and whatever else. And that seems to be, whether you were, still, foraging people or, agricultural people or whatever, that permeates throughout society, that you still had to live in balance with everything, or things would get out of balance, and then that would not be good. So if any of the few pan-native things, that sort of idea was built in, whether you were hunting bison or you were growing corn, there was still, okay, there's this many of us, this is how much we need to grow, and we don't want to disturb more land than we need to. So when we need more land, we'll disturb it, until then we just grow what we need.
I feel like we could
Yeah,
learn something from that.
Oh, so much. I mean, I think, our culture in the United States so much ends up revolving around abundance. Like everyone just wants more, more, more all the time. And, we're seeing the impact that's having on our country, on society, the world. I mean, they just had the climate summit trying to figure out,
Right.
how to bring things back into balance, so that we don't run out of those valuable resources.
Yeah, within the world of archaeology, there's some specialties like marine archaeologists who go find sites under the water. I still keep pushing for it. We need a new one called climate change archaeology, because as the glaciers recede, we're finding all these cities and people and mummies and stuff that are just eroding out of the giant ice sheets that we didn't even know were there.
Wow. I didn't even think of that.
That I was gonna say, that just blew my mind.
Yeah, there's all these mummies in Peru that are coming out of glaciers. There's mammoths coming out of Russia and Canada, and it's crazy. It's affected the world that that is different.
Yeah, well, and it's so wild to think about, like, because we think of like the North Pole area as this, basically this cold wasteland that's uninhabitable. So then, like, finding signs of past communities there, that's really cool.
And much older than anyone thought either.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, everyone thought it was like, 12,000 years, that's max. Now it's probably closer to 30. I think most
Really?
people.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah, in fact, it was a site just south of Albuquerque that was published. They found it 3 years ago, but they published just a few months ago, where they got those footprints at White Sands.
I
And those
saw
are
that.
23,000 years old. Yeah.
That is incredible. White Sands
Yeah.
is a pretty cool place.
I'll have to add it to my
You
list of
should.
places to go.
Absolutely. So, Professor Torres, what is unique then about your tribe, about the Navajo?
Well, we're kind of known for our silversmithing, any sort of the classic Southwestern look is silversmithing. We learned silversmithing from the Mexican occupation, but the jewelry styles haven't changed. They were just stamped on leather with turquoise instead of, now that we use silver. And of course, sheep, which we also borrowed from the Spanish, from which we make most of our textiles from. So those are kind of signature things for Navajo people. Mutton sandwich, sitting on a rug, watching the beautiful mesas go by.
Yeah, there's not much better than a New Mexico sunset, that's for sure.
You don't miss the ocean?
I didn't grow up anywhere near an ocean. Actually, I take it back.
That's
I was
fair.
born in here. I was born in Southern California, but then, even when as a kid, I didn't go to the beach, even when I did live here. But then, it's where I went. There's no, the people say they're going to the beach, it was actually just a place where the water slows down on the Rio Grande in South Albuquerque. People would say it's the beach, and there is kind of a beach there, but it's the river.
Yeah. That's cool though. I just love sunsets in general, so it's something about them. It's just natural beauty,
And Navajo Nation, people think of it as all the mesa tops and all those giant features and stuff, but most of the nation's actually in a nice forested area. We're high altitude for most of the nation. There's a desert on one side, but we have lots of forested areas too. That's where our most of our homeland is now.
Right.
Very cool. Let's see. What have you noticed that Native American culture has influenced in other cultures?
I think the biggest influence is food. We have the oldest domesticated plants in the world, and 4/5 of all the plants that are still in domestication were created here. Like corns and beans and squash and potatoes and peanuts, and you can go on and on. Cashews, Brazil nuts, everything but rice and millet is pretty much domesticated here. Rice, millet, and wheat, they were domesticated in the Middle East and China, but most of everything that's grown, I mean, of that 1/5 that's left, that's wheat and barley and millet. But most everything is, even food that you think of as, traditional African food like manioc. Well, no, that's actually an Andean crop that was brought over by the Portuguese to Africa that became a staple crop for them.
Huh.
Potatoes in Ireland, no, that came from Peru, that was brought over by the Spanish, and because that part was a Spanish colony at the time. But yeah, I think food is probably the biggest thing. You can't eat anything that doesn't have something that was domesticated here, because corn isn't pretty much everything we eat. So
It really is.
Yeah. I think there's a documentary, I want to say it's called King Corn. It talks about like how it's in almost anything you can think of. I mean, it's in batteries and like tires and stuff. Like, it's crazy. Cool that we figured out so many ways to use it, but yeah, wild. So talking about culture, what are some of the values that are associated with Native American culture in general and with the Navajo Nation specifically?
Well, I think I kind of touched on it in sort of this idea of community is really important. Where, I consider myself, somebody barked, got my dog excited. But yeah, I often say I'm Navajo before I say I'm American, because it's still, that's kind of the nation I come from. And even within the nation, there are 120 states within the nation. So I'm from the community of Naizi, which is in the state of the Western Agency, which is part of the Navajo Nation, which is part of New Mexico. That part of it is. So, and that sense of community is important. I introduce myself by my clans, my mother's clans, my father's clans, my paternal and fraternal grandparents' clans. And you can always guarantee, no matter where you are on the nation, if you get a flat tire, if you're just hungry, you need water, some clan member is going to be around there, and they're your family, even though you're not really biologically related to any cape, but cosmologically you're connected, and that clan means they'll come out and change your tire, or you'll bring you some water, or whatever it is. That sort of sense of community is still very, very strong, and I think that's true for a lot of Native communities. I mean, otherwise we wouldn't have survived all this time. We were able to stick together and work together and keep traditions and languages alive as best we could. I mean, I feel really fortunate that there were so many Native speakers of the Navajo language that I know Navajo language, whereas, there's just a handful of Kuya Native speakers or Luiseño Native speakers. People are learning it for sure, and it's a sort of a nice rebirth. But it's, I feel lucky in that sense. But yeah, I would say sort of community, just being together and making sure we all stick together and help each other as best we can. I mean,
that's really beautiful. Have you noticed a difference in the newest generation of Native Americans as opposed to your generation, or you mentioned your parents, just in how they practice or how they feel?
I think what I'm seeing with, sort of the 20 somethings, the students right now, is that there really is kind of a sort of re-indigenation, I don't know what word to use there, that's happening and connecting people from North and South America, where people are connecting to their Mexican nationals, but they're more connecting to their indigenous roots of Mexico. That yes, they're El Salvadoran nationals, but they're connecting to the Salvadoran indigenous relatives. Before, I mean, when I was younger, it's like, oh, well, there's no indigenous people outside of North America. I was like, well, of course there are. They have their own countries, so it's a little different. But I'm seeing a lot of younger people taking ownership of that. It's like, oh, I'm from El Salvador, but I am of this tribe, or I'm Mexican, but I'm actually Chichimec from this part of Mexico, or I'm my family still speaks Nahuatl, or whatever it is. And I'm seeing a lot more of sort of reconnecting natives, and I think that's really important. So yeah, I think it's sort of I see it as a good thing. So that's a big shift.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Reconnecting to your heritage and to your roots and the traditions and everything that goes with that. I feel like it's necessary. and definitely something to be celebrated. Speaking of traditions, do you have any in particular that you practice or that you make an effort to maintain?
Well, there's several ceremony I always participate in. There's one that sort of as a healing ceremony that we do to kind of add protection and healing sort of spiritual aspects of oneself that I go home for as often as I can, mostly because of what I do as an archaeologist. I handle lots of stuff that I probably shouldn't be handling and normally wouldn't be handled had not, an Amazon building went up here and found this stuff. So it's called the Blessing Way ceremony, and I go back as often as I can to get that done just for me. But otherwise, we just had our New Year's, traditional Navajo New Year's, which was a couple weeks ago, as the winter months start. That's when we have our New Year's festivities. I guess that's probably the biggest ones that I do, other than, when I go home and there's something's happening, a wedding or, rite of passage ceremony and things like that. A friend of mine, their son's going off they join the Marines. We need to have a ceremony for them to go away and those kinds of things. But there's some big ceremonies we do in the spring, but most of them are actually for us, it's during the winter months. It's when everyone's inside. It's when you tell the traditional stories. It's when you talk about, teach people how to weave or how to do whatever traditional skills there are. And it varies from place to place, but that's something that I really enjoy, the winter months. That's when I get to do my own beadwork, and that's when I get to do artsy things, making pozole and, fry bread, and which aren't really traditional, but it's pozole is, but yeah, just kind of, eating too much what you do during the winter.
Okay, no,
Yeah, got it.
I'm hungry for
Well-
pozole now.
Yeah, well, we'll have turkey pozole next week.
All right. I'm going to go off script a little bit. And since you're from New Mexico, our Secretary of Interior is also from New Mexico. What do you think the significance of having a cabinet member of Indigenous origins is too?
It's insanely important. I mean, I've known Deb a long time. I actually worked on several of her campaigns when I was in New Mexico, because she ran for the state Senate and the House of Representatives. So, I campaigned for her a bunch. And I really think she's an amazing person. But even just at the fact that Laguna Pueblo woman could be at the cabinet level is enormous for Indian country, just because we've not been sat at the table ever. And then we have someone who's more traditional than a lot of people probably even were comfortable with. But that's okay. That's fine. But yeah, just for morale in Indian country was just enormous. I mean, there's, people who might not like this or might like that about her, but no one's going to say it's like she shouldn't be there. She deserves to be there. And I'm very happy that she is.
Fantastic. I think it's great too.
Yeah, representation is so important, and getting those voices heard. Let's see, okay. What is something that you feel is often misunderstood about Native Americans or Native American culture?
Well, I think part of it is that there's kind of this romanticized, noble, savage vision of us, that we're all sitting in our little hogans hammering away as little silversmiths or something. But no, we drive cars. We have hydraulic presses instead of hammers now. And if you're a jeweler. But so I think the biggest is that, that we're stuck in the 1700s or something. It's like, no, there's doctors and lawyers and, craftspeople and house builders and, yeah, there's some traditional weavers and traditional silversmith, absolutely, but we're kind of native people are everywhere, and you might not, it's like, oh, well, in Southern California, it's like, oh, well, you must be you're Hispanic or you're Mexican. Nope, I'm from Spobo, or I'm from Morongo, or I'm from, Flores Martinez or whatever. So the idea that Native people are extinct or gone or still live in the past, yeah, no, we're alive and well. And we're all around you, and you might not even realize it.
Hiding in plain sight, right?
Hiding in plain sight.
You mentioned all the different professions. You said yourself you are a tribal archaeologist. Could you tell us a little bit about what that means?
Well, it started for me because where I grew up was just north of a place called Chaco Canyon, which is this giant archaeological ancestral Pueblo complex. that was built 2,000 years ago, and most of it's still standing. But that was kind of my backyard when I was a kid. I played there, and hide and seek on all these forts, ancient forts that we played in. And then before I was even in high school, I was 12, 13 years old. I ended up, my grandparents wouldn't let me sit around doing nothing all summer. You got to go work, you got to do something. So I worked for the tribe's civilian conservation corps. We basically got a bunch of Navajo boys and put them to work, is basically what they did. And so we worked for the tribe doing whatever the tribe needed. It was like, cleaning, trash cans in the parks. And I ended up on a road crew that was going right through Chaco. So there were archaeologists on the road crew. So I was like, okay, well, this is cool. Well, who built it? Why is it here? How come I don't know anything about this? And they're like, well, they're the Anasazi people, and they vanished, they disappeared. And I'm like, no, I think it looks just like Taos Pueblo today. I think it looks like Sandia Pueblo today. It's like, isn't there a connection between those two people? Well, of course there are. But what I was hearing was that, no, these people went extinct or they disappeared, and those are different people. And I realized, well, what's missing from this is an indigenous lens. We need to hear the oral tradition stories combined with the archaeology. And I thought, well, that's a niche that's not being covered, and that's something I want to do. So when I do archaeology, I do the physical part, but I do a lot of interviews. I talk to a lot of living people to talk about, interpretation. Well, why is this village empty? Well, it's like, oh, well, because this and this happened. And sometimes it's cosmological, sometimes it's, other kinds of things, but there's always a little kernel of something in there. And I kind of enjoy wearing, sort of a scientific hat, but also an indigenous hat to kind of make sure that a more complete story is being told. So that's sort of how I ended up doing what I do. And I get criticism from, some folks that, well, that's not scientific. I'm like, well, archaeologists just making up a story anyway. We just look at the data. Without a time machine, we're never going to really know. We just have some data that shows, yeah, this is probably what happened. This is when it happened. And it's like, well, this is their story of how it happened and what happened. And the truth is somewhere probably in between, and that's okay.
Right. Well, and I mean, I think, yeah, it sounds like you kind of mix the science of archaeology with history, and that practice of history more often than not is talking to people that were there, and that becomes like a firsthand account of events, like, because exactly, without a time machine, like how else are we gonna know?
Same with history. I mean, I think I was talking about this in my class the other day. It was like, prove to me Abraham Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address. It's like, well, how do you prove it? Well, you can't prove it. You could pull up this document, you could pull up this document, and yeah, you could say, likelihood this happened because all these newspapers said it happened. But I can't prove it happened. We just have to gather historic documents to show that it probably happened. But when it comes to something 3,000 years ago, you definitely can't prove it. You can just show the data tells this story. If some other person looks at it through a different lens, maybe it's a slightly different story. But it's definitely not aliens. I can draw the line.
I love that. I would like to actually backtrack a little bit. When you were introducing yourself, you acknowledged all of the different positions in the tribe and things. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about your position in the tribe and the importance of that.
Well, we're a matrilineal matriarchal society. So all my clans are my mother's clans. So I introduce myself. This is me. This is where I'm from. These are my mother's clans. And my mother's clans come from a very particular part of the nation. So if I'm introducing myself, somebody immediately knows, well, they know my name and they know where my family comes from. They come from my mother's clan, which is a place that is actually underneath a lake now. Where our tribe comes from is underneath Navajo Lake. So we moved south to get out of the being submerged. And then I talk about my father's side. It's like, also my father's clans come from these areas. And then, but his clans are his mother's clans, right? So it's still, we're connecting the mothers together. And then my, my mother's father's clan and my father's clan, which are much more distantly related. So all my male relatives on my dad's side, they're not really relatives in a lot of ways, because they're his mom's clan. He belongs to his sister's family, not necessarily my family, because my family's all about mom and grandma and great grandma, etc. So So when you introduce yourself, you tell anyone that understands where I'm from physically, where my family comes from, the importance of those clans and how they are in the tribe. You know, am I from a family of healers? Am I a family of farmers? Am I a family of whatever traditional singers and medicine people that once existed? And then also a little bit about where my father comes from and where his maternal clans come from. And because again, his mom's more important than his uncles or whatever. So that's sort of what everybody does. It's just kind of like lays out everybody instead of having to say, you know, everything, you know, oh, I'm from here and this is where I'm from. Because, you know, I don't live there anymore. But if I introduce myself to someone else, I go, oh, you're from Naizi, you know, or some maybe Herfino or one of those little communities there, just by knowing where my clans are from. Because, you know, that's where most of them are still.
Okay.
So, and then it tells everybody about me. And it's like, okay, well, you're from this family of healers and you do this and you do that. And I'm like, yeah, I used to do all that.
That's really
I
neat.
can still butcher a sheep if I have to.
Good to know.
Right. Yeah. If I ever have a need, I know who to call. Okay, so let's see. Moving forward again a little bit here. We've heard the term tribal sovereignty, and I was wondering if you could give a bit of a definition for us and explain the importance.
Well, people mention tribal sovereignty. They're generally referring to what we call the federally recognized tribes. There's, you know, the federal government recognizes about 500 nations or something as separate nations. That's why I'm from the Navajo Nation, because we are treated as a separate government, which is why we have treaties. You know, we have treaties with Canada and Peru and whatever else. Well, you also have treaties with tribal nations because we are sovereign. Other than printing our own money, we still have our own economy, our own roads, our own everything, our own schools, our own hospitals, whatever kind of level of autonomy the tribe might want. Which is why some tribes have gaming, because, you know, that's something they've chosen to do. So tribal sovereignty really is the ability to acknowledge that you are our own sovereign government and you need to be treated from a government to government relationship when it comes to anything with the feds or the state or the counties. And there's also state and county recognized tribes that have a little bit of that, but they don't have any land base or anything else, so it's a little more complicated for them. So in general, you're referring to mostly the federally recognized tribes and their relationship with other governments, whether it be like a county or a city or the feds. And we can, you know, we can technically do just about anything we want on our, although it's technically leased land, it's still considered our land and we can do what we wish. And you know, and that's a big deal. There's Hopi is another kind of complicated case because their nation is actually inside the Navajo Nation. So they actually have their own kind of complex sovereignty because the Hopis have always been there. And then when they gave us our reservation, instead of giving us more on the eastern side, they gave us more on the western side, which is actually their territory and their homeland. And Albuquerque took the other side. So we're not into our, half our nation is still where we were always, and the other half is now where the mostly Pueblo people were. So they put a circle around the Hopi reservation inside the Navajo Nation. And there's actually one tiny little Navajo chapter inside the Hopi Nation on top of that.
Because, you know, they had to make it more complicated.
Yeah,
right?
and they all have different time zones, which is even more complicated.
Oh my gosh.
Oh,
Yeah.
because
so even though
the
Navajo Nation changes the time with New Mexico, the Hopis change their time with Arizona, which means they don't change their time at all.
Right.
And that little tiny little spot changes with New Mexico. So whenever you have a meeting, you have to say, are we meeting on Tuba City time? Are we meeting on Navajo Nation time? Is it Hopi time? Is it Genito time? And so inevitably someone's always early and someone's always late. It just happens.
Well, I imagine that has to be unnecessarily confusing.
Yeah, because it's crazy.
I mean, I personally feel like we should just get rid of daylight savings altogether, but you know, it's a whole other conversation. Oh, I'm sure. So we've talked a lot about Native American culture, and I think some of the more well-known or commonly heard about are different dances or like forms of artwork. Are there any in particular that you feel like should be more widely discussed or celebrated?
I guess just that, you know, all the artwork across all of Native America is different based on where they are. So when we have, we do a lot of stone work because that's kind of where we are, a lot of lapidary work and make stone jewelry. And people in the Northwest Coast carve these absolutely gorgeous redwood bowls and canoes and boxes and things like that. And that aesthetic I love. The folks in the Northeast do a lot of amazing baskets and what they call sort of applique beadwork. Hump beadwork. It's a really thick kind of beadwork they do up there. Northern Plains has their beautiful beadwork and quill work. So I think there's something to be some art form that should be celebrated in all those areas, really. I mean, of course, I didn't touch South America, but there's all kinds of great pottery traditions down there, of course. But yeah, I just, if someone is interested in collecting artwork, it's not all about beadwork. There's some great potters out there and wood carvers and things like that. Baskets for sure. The California baskets are still some of my favorites. They're just the most absolutely beautiful baskets here. I mean, I love Navajo baskets too, but a Pomo basket, there's nothing like it. They're really nice.
All right. Trying to think did you have any other questions, Dr. Weber?
No, I'm just so thankful that you were able to join us, Professor Torres, so that we could record and just learn more about you and celebrate the history of Native Americans and the Navajo culture.
Yeah. I'm happy to be here, and I'll take the days off next week, but we're not real big Thanksgiving celebrators. A lot of Native homes, that's kind of more of a morning ceremony, but yeah, we'll still have pozole because turkeys are cheap right now. So.
I was going to ask you about that. It's not a very festive holiday, I would say.
Not usually. I mean, we certainly do our share of eating, but that's kind of
That's the end of it.
And I'll probably catch a football game or two, but.
So cool.
Yeah, what team is it that always plays on Thanksgiving? The Cowboys?
The Cowboys.
It used to be the Cowboys and the Washington, now the Washington team.
Oh, right. Right. Yeah, they're still figuring that one out, aren't they?
Do you think that they will come around with some of those names? I mean,
I think they kind of gave up. I think he was so mad that he had so much pressure to change the name. I mean, and Native America has been trying to get him to change the name forever because it's such a horrible term. I mean, I don't know if you know, but the term comes from the bounties people would get when they would turn in a piece of red skin, an ear, a nose, a scalp, whatever, to prove that you killed a Native person, and then you get your $200. So yeah, we've not been happy with that term for a long time. And he was so, he basically said, hell will freeze over before he changed the name. So much pressure when Nike and all the sponsors started pulling out, he had no choice. So as a result, I think he's just, pouting. I'm not going to give it a name now. You're just going to be stuck with that. Okay, fine.
It's like
I don't care.
There's no name. It's just
it's just the Washington team.
Yeah, it's a kindergartner having a tantrum.
Yeah.
I noticed that.
That's fine as long as its name's changed. I don't care what you change it to, or just call it the Washington. That's fine too.
I really would like for them to get rid of those chants though that they have it.
Oh, I couldn't watch the darn World Series because of those the tomahawk chopping kind of pseudo native singing that they do.
It drives me crazy.
It drives me crazy too.
But I can't even imagine how hurtful that must be. I know that the Indians are going to the Guardians, I think they're calling them.
Right.
Which is fine.
Yeah, we got rid of the logo a couple years back, but they finally changed the name too, which is good.
Yeah, and I think a few more need to fall in line personally.
Yeah, one that I've heard people kind of go back and forth on is Kansas City being the Chiefs. I'm not sure what the majority feel is.
Yeah, that's not as bad as some of the others, but they still have that tomahawk chop thing going on.
Yeah, they do the same as the Braves.
Yeah.
Someday people
baby
will.
steps. We got the big one. We got Washington, so I'm happy with that. So
that's good.
Just start there, and then the rest will follow.
Yeah, dominoes, right? Well, thank you so much for joining us, Professor Torres. I certainly learned a lot, and I'm just grateful for your time. And
this is good. Thank you.
All right, and that has been another episode of Talon Talks. Join us again. Let's see, 2 weeks?
In 2 weeks, yes.
Yeah, in 2 weeks on the 2nd of December for our mental health episode.
Thank you.
Have a great night, everybody.